Easter, a time for fake grass, plastic eggs, these things, chocolate bunnies, and people dressed as bunnies. And then there are the weird parts of Easter, like fake grass, plastic eggs, these things, chocolate bunnies, and people dressed as bunnies, which is interesting. But what does all this stuff have to do with Easter? And if this holiday is about more than candy and wearing uncomfortable clothes to church and lunch with your relatives, what makes Easter happy?
During the junior high winter retreat, I shared that when I was transitioning from 6th grade to 7th grade, there was a really difficult moment where I lost a lot of friends. In fact, I lost all my friends. The people I grew up with playing sports at recess and just doing dumb stuff with, like, they were gone. We just grew apart. And when I went into 7th grade, I didn't have friends. I didn't know where I belonged or who I could hang out with. And that was a really tough time. It was a really tough time, and I'm glad I went through it when I was in 7th grade. I'm not going through it now because I was able to adapt and transition, but during that time, during that, like, good year, there was I felt alone, very alone during a lot of that, and I'm sure many of you have experienced feeling alone as well. Maybe your family moved and you're trying to find new friends. Maybe your friend group changed or you lost someone who was really, really close to you. Maybe you recently experienced a breakup with your boyfriend or with your girlfriend. Maybe you've made certain decisions that no one else understands. Maybe you even have a question or a feeling or a doubt and you feel like nobody understands you. I think we all know what it feels like to be on our own. And this is very different than experiencing freedom, right? Like, being on your own in freedom is a lot better than being on your own and being alone. When you're on your own and you're alone, there's anxiety, there's fear, there's a lot of unknown going on, right? And it's all wrapped up into one. And when we feel like we're on our own, we start to believe things that seem true in the moment, but they're not generally true. Maybe we think that nobody understands us or probably never will understand us or that we'll never get through what we're facing. It seems like this giant mountain that we're never going to be able to climb. Maybe we feel like we don't have enough strength to make it on our own, or maybe we become more afraid and isolation only intensifies it all. Here's what's so troubling about loneliness. Statistically speaking, almost half of Americans feel alone. Okay, now I have to admit, sometimes being alone it's okay, right? Like, some people like that. I'm not an introvert. My wife is an introvert, and my wife loves being able to just stay home, hang out with our dogs, and watch Disney movies. And to her, that's fun. That's a good night. There's a big difference between being alone and feeling alone. Those are two really different things. And that sense of loneliness has contributed to a rise in things like anxiety or self-harm or depression or even suicide in our culture. Why? Why? Because loneliness tends to make us feel hopeless. Think about it. When we feel alone, we tend to feel overwhelmed. We're overwhelmed by our situation. We're overwhelmed by our circumstances, our feelings, our pain, and we're overwhelmed by confusion. And here's what's crazy about that. Loneliness feels so bad to us because God wired us that way. Now, I'm not saying God wanted us to feel depression or God wanted us to feel sad, but I am saying that we were created and we were wired for close relationships. You and I were never meant to carry the weight of what we feel, experience, or worry about on our own. And so it makes sense that when we have to do that, when we don't have what we were created for, things don't feel right to us. But what do you do about it? Sure, showing up for friends it's important, and joining a small groups is important, but there are times when being alone and feeling alone is just an unavoidable part of life. So how do we handle it? Well, believe it or not, what happened on that very first Easter and the days following can be a game changer for us when it comes to this seemingly overwhelming problem. The very first Easter, Jesus left his closest friends feeling overwhelmed in a similar way. For years, they had been traveling together. Doing life together, hanging out every day. And suddenly, they were completely on their own. At least that's what they thought the couple days after Jesus' crucifixion. While we don't spend a lot of time at Easter thinking about the time between Jesus' crucifixion and Jesus' resurrection, I can guarantee you that his closest friends, the disciples, his followers, never forgot how those days felt. You see, Jesus' closest friends and followers they walked away from jobs, they walked away from family, they walked away from their finances, they walked away from their safety just to follow him. And then he died. Like this person that they gave up their life for, that they had been following for years, dies. The future that they had imagined for their leader, for their country, for themselves, just disappeared. Just like that, everything changed. So what? So what did they do? Some stuck together. Many took off running for their lives. And they had no clue what was going to happen next. And we know how the story ends. But at the time, they didn't. So imagine their surprise and relief at seeing Jesus alive again. That is until Jesus left again. Yeah, you heard me right. We know that Jesus died. He came back to life. And then later, he left again. But this time, their response was completely different from the first. The first time Jesus left, they ran away for their lives because of the people who were seeking to kill Jesus. And this time when Jesus left, things were so much different. And we can look to Luke. We can look to Luke to tell us how this story went. You see, Luke was a physician, and he wanted an accurate picture of Jesus' life to share with others. And so he went about investigating and trying to figure out like those people who knew Jesus and those people who experienced things from Jesus. And he collected all of this and he wrote his gospel. We call it the Gospel according to Luke, or the book of Luke. And then later on, he even recorded the missionary work of those 11 disciples, as well as Paul and Barnabas and Timothy. And he recorded all that in what we call the book of Acts, which is more like a letter. So according to Luke, when Jesus left a second time, his followers didn't seem to think that they had been left alone again. In fact, it wasn't until after Jesus left a second time that Christianity really took off and it began to change human history forever. And it seems Jesus made it that way on purpose. And we'll get to the rest of what Luke said, but before we do, I want to look at another document written by one of Jesus' good friends named John. John remembers that before Jesus was crucified, he told his disciples that he was going away, but they didn't get it at that time. And this is what he said in the final meal with his best friends, his closest friends, before he was arrested. This is in John chapter 16, starting at verse 7. John wrote, "But in fact, it is best for you that I go away." This is Jesus speaking. Jesus says, "It is best for you that I go away." Jesus actually told the disciples that it would be better for them if he left. But why? Why? That doesn't make any sense. But if we continue reading, we know why. You see, Jesus said, because if I don't, the advocate won't come. If I do go away, then I will send him to you. Jesus said that in order for the advocate to come, he had to go away. The term advocate usually refers to someone who helps, someone who comforts, someone who defends others. And the same is true here. This advocate Jesus is referring to, it's who we call the Holy Spirit. It's basically the Spirit of Jesus among us, even though he's not physically present. He is the one who helps us. He is the one who comforts us. He is the one who gives us wisdom and power beyond ourselves. The Holy Spirit came to earth after Jesus left earth. Jesus promised that if he left, it would be better for us. And why? We still have to keep asking why. Because the Holy Spirit would be here. And once the Holy Spirit arrived, the power and the Spirit of Jesus could be everywhere, not just in Jesus, everywhere. And so right before Jesus ascends into heaven and leaves for the second time, he reminds his disciples of what he said the last meal together before he was killed, before his physical body was leaving, but his spirit would remain behind. Check it out. So in Acts chapter 1, verse 8, it says this, But you will receive power when the Holy Spirit comes upon you, and you will be my witnesses, telling people everywhere, in Jerusalem, throughout Judea and Samaria, to the ends of the earth. All of the things Jesus could have reminded his disciples of, he chose to remind them that the Holy Spirit was on the way. That's it. He could have reminded them of anything. He could have gone over his teachings again. He could, instead, he says, just remember that when I leave, the Holy Spirit is coming. The Holy Spirit would come and give them power to tell people all over the world about him. In other words, it was a reminder that even though he was leaving, even though Jesus was leaving, they would not be alone. And guess what? It's exactly what happened. In the days and years to come, Jesus' followers would receive the power from the Holy Spirit to tell people all around the world the good news. And today, roughly 1/3 of the earth's population says that they believe that message. They believe in the message of the good news of Jesus. The Christian movement, started by Jesus and carried on by his disciples, outlasted things like the powerful Roman Empire. It outlasted the intense persecution from governments and other religions. It even outlasted thousands of years of change. The men and women who Jesus left twice started the greatest movement in human history. Even when their leaders seemingly left, even with their overwhelming lack of resources, even with their perceived powerlessness in the face of the authorities of the day, the Holy Spirit gave them the power, even though they seemed powerless. And even though Jesus left, he sent the Holy Spirit to be with them. That meant that even though Jesus wasn't physically there, they would never be alone. And here's the best part of all this. Jesus' promise was not just for his first disciples. It wasn't just for those first disciples. When Jesus promised an advocate who would come and give us power and be with us, that was true for everyone at the time, and that is true for everyone who would ever believe in him. That means that you and I have access to that very same Spirit. Easter is so much bigger than a celebration of something that happened 2,000 years ago. Yes, Jesus' resurrection changed everything, and the resurrection is at the center of everything we believe as Christians, but it's also a reminder of his power. It's a reminder of his presence that are still available to us today. Easter can change everything about how we live our lives right now because of this simple truth. Easter means you're never alone. Did you catch that? Easter means you are never alone. Jesus' first followers knew what it was like to feel like they were on their own. They experienced that after he died. It seemed like all their hopes were crushed. They may have even felt like they made a huge decision. It may have even felt like they made a huge mistake following him. And while I can even imagine that they loved seeing him come back to life again, they were probably surprised when he didn't stay with them. They probably wondered how Jesus not being physically with them could be a good thing. But soon they learned that it was. He left something behind, and actually it's better to say he left someone behind. An advocate, his Spirit, which reminded them they would never be alone. What if you and I could live with the same assurance and confidence that they did after receiving the Holy Spirit? What if no matter how lonely, no matter how overwhelmed or how misunderstood we felt, we could trust that we're never alone? Let me ask you more directly. What if all this is real? What if everything I just talked about is actually real? What if the literal, actual God who created everything, who died and who rose back again, is literally always with you? What if the Holy Spirit, the Spirit of Jesus, is very real, very here, and wants to help you with whatever you're facing today? Whatever that difficulty is, whatever that mountain is that you feel like you can't climb, What if he wants to help you? See, simply trusting that the Holy Spirit is with us can change everything for us. In fact, even though we can't see him and may not always feel like he's there, knowing he is with us in the moments we feel on our own means that we can be confident of a few things. First off, you can talk to him anytime, any place, and for any reason. When you feel alone, what if you choose to talk to God about what you're going through? In the New Testament, we learn that the Holy Spirit helps us talk to God when we don't know what to say. What if the next time you felt like you were on your own, you chose to talk to God about what you're facing or what you're feeling? What would happen if you chose to believe that he hears you and his Spirit is at work in ways that we can't see? Number 2, you're stronger than you think you are. The odds were stacked against Jesus' followers. Like Jesus left, and they weren't qualified to do what they needed to do. And the Roman government was becoming so powerful. Yet the movement they carried forward has changed the world. That's because they knew that they were stronger than they seemed. They knew that even though it looked like they were on their own, they had the power of God flowing in them and through them and out to other people. The same is true for you and I. Well, when we face challenges that seem too overwhelming for us, we can trust and we can be confident that the Holy Spirit's power in us cannot be overcome. We can also be confident that God's power in other believers will be there to support us as well. You might feel like you're facing something that's too powerful for you. And that may be true, but it's not too powerful for the one that is in you, the one that created the world, the one that brought Jesus back from the dead. Remember, Easter means you're not alone. You're never alone. The power of Easter is that Jesus enabled us to be confident that we'll never be alone again. Why? Because we trust in his Spirit that lives inside of us. In a day when that many of us are feeling so lonely, this might be the happiest news we've heard in a while. Maybe you're trapped in your house right now and you can't get out and you feel so alone. I know our phones help us connect a bit, but really nothing beats that face-to-face communication. But even when you feel like you're alone, you're never alone. God is always with you because his Holy Spirit is always with you. So as we wrap up this video and as we transition into small groups, I want you to think about this one question, okay? In what area of my life do I feel alone? Ask that for yourself. What is one area in my life that I feel alone? Then imagine Jesus looking you in the eyes and saying, you are never alone. You never have to do this on your own. I'm with you. We got this together. Maybe the best news you'll hear this week is that you don't have to imagine this, that the Holy Spirit makes it a reality for us. And that is why Easter is so very happy. Cool, guys. Thanks for joining us. Thanks for tuning in. We're going to transition into small groups. If you haven't already, go ahead and text Brian if you want to be a part of a small group, okay? So, cool. See you next week.